Picture a humble security guard, fired on the spot for saluting a beggar in a rain-soaked alley. His boss sneering that he's wasting time on trash. But what if that beggar is a war hero, and the next day, an army of soldiers storms the town to honor the guard's kindness? This is a tale of respect, redemption, and unshakable justice that'll leave you in awe. Join us on Endless Stories for a journey that'll grip your heart. Hit subscribe, ring the bell, and let's dive in. If you believe in the power of kindness and the fight for justice, join the Endless Stories family. Subscribe now, share this video, and comment "Honor Prevails" to show you're with us. Let's uncover this unforgettable story together. The rain poured down in sheets over the small town of Maplewood, Tennessee, on the evening of May 25, 2025, turning the streets into shimmering rivers of gray. The neon sign of Harper's Hardware flickered above the entrance, casting a faint glow on the sidewalk where puddles reflected the dim light. Inside, the store was quiet save for the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional creak of the old wooden floor. Most of the customers had hurried home to escape the storm, leaving the aisles empty except for a lone figure in a Navy security uniform, standing near the front entrance with a watchful eye. Marcus Evans, at 34, was the kind of man who blended into the background. His broad shoulders and steady gaze unnoticed by most. His quiet demeanor a shield in a town where gossip traveled faster than the wind. Marcus had worked at Harper's for nearly a decade, ever since he'd moved to Maplewood after his father's passing. He wasn't one for attention, preferring the steady rhythm of his nightly rounds, checking the locks, scanning the parking lot, keeping the store safe while the town slept. His life was simple. A rented room above a barbershop, a small collection of books on military history, and a faded photograph of his father in a Marine uniform, a keepsake that reminded him of the values he'd been raised on: honor, duty, respect. Marcus had never served himself, a knee injury in his youth keeping him from enlisting, but he carried those values in his heart, etched as deeply as the lines on his father's face. That night, as the rain hammered the windows, Marcus stood at his post, his uniform slightly damp from a quick check outside. He was about to radio in his hourly report when he saw a figure through the glass, a man hunched against the storm, standing in the alley across the street. The man was old, his gray beard matted with rain, his tattered coat hanging off his thin frame like a shroud. He clutched a small paper bag to his chest, his shoulders trembling as the wind whipped around him. Marcus's eyes narrowed, a flicker of recognition stirring in his chest. The coat bore a faded insignia, barely visible through the downpour. A U.S. Army patch, the kind his father had once worn. Without a second thought, Marcus stepped outside, the rain soaking him instantly as he crossed the street. The man didn't look up, his gaze fixed on the ground, but as Marcus approached, he saw the scars on the man's hands, the way his left leg seemed to drag slightly, wrapped in a makeshift bandage. "Sir," Marcus said softly, his voice steady despite the storm, "are you all right?" The man lifted his head, his blue eyes clouded with exhaustion and something deeper: pain, shame, pride all tangled together. "Just passing through," he murmured, his voice hoarse, barely audible over the rain. "Don't mean to cause trouble." Marcus's heart tightened. He'd seen men like this before, veterans, forgotten by the town, dismissed as beggars by those who didn't care to look closer. But Marcus knew better. He straightened his posture, his hand rising to his forehead in a crisp salute, a gesture of respect he'd learned from his father. "Thank you for your service, sir," he said, his voice firm, his eyes locked on the man's. For a moment, the old man froze, his trembling hand reaching up as if to return the salute. But then he dropped it, his shoulders sagging. "Ain't no one saluted me in years," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Name's Daniel Reed." Before Marcus could respond, a sharp voice cut through the rain like a blade. "Evans, what the hell are you doing?" It was Carl Harper, the store owner, standing at the entrance with his arms crossed, his face twisted with disgust. Carl was a wiry man in his late 50s, his gray hair slicked back, his temper as notorious as his thrift. He stomped across the street, ignoring the rain, his eyes darting from Marcus to the old man with a sneer. "We don't pay you to play soldier with street trash," he barked, his voice loud enough to echo down the empty street. "Get back inside now." Marcus lowered his hand, his jaw tightening as he turned to face Carl. "He's a veteran, sir," he said, his tone calm but firm. He needed a moment of respect. Carl's sneer widened, his voice dripping with venom. "Respect? For this? He's a beggar, Evans. You're wasting my time and my money." He pointed at Daniel, his finger jabbing the air. "Get him out of here before he scares off customers." Marcus stood his ground, his eyes steady. "He's not causing trouble. He's just trying to stay dry." Carl's face turned red, his voice rising to a shout. "I don't care. You don't get to decide who's welcome here. You're fired. Pack your stuff and get out." The words hit Marcus like a punch, but he didn't flinch. He'd heard worse in his life, and he'd learned long ago to stand tall, just as his father had taught him. The rain continued to pour, soaking through his uniform, but he turned back to Daniel, his voice soft. "I'm sorry, sir. I hope you find shelter tonight." Daniel's eyes glistened, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You've got a good heart, son," he whispered, clutching his bag tighter as he turned and shuffled back into the storm. Marcus watched him go, the weight of Carl's words sinking in as he walked back to the store to gather his things. The few customers inside avoided his gaze, their silence louder than the rain. He grabbed his jacket and radio, leaving his badge on the counter, and stepped back into the night, the storm swallowing him whole. He had no job, no plan, and only a few dollars in his pocket. But as he walked through the rain, he felt a strange peace. He'd done what was right, and that was enough for now. Little did he know, the storm he'd faced was nothing compared to the one that would arrive at dawn. The rain had turned the streets of Maplewood, Tennessee, into a maze of slick shadows by the time Marcus Evans left Harper's Hardware on that stormy evening of May 25, 2025. His Navy security uniform clung to his broad shoulders, soaked through from the downpour, and his boots splashed through puddles as he walked down Main Street, the weight of his dismissal pressing heavier than the storm. The neon lights of the town blurred in the rain, their reflections dancing on the wet pavement, but Marcus barely noticed. His mind replayed the moment he'd saluted the old man in the alley. Daniel Reed, a name now etched in his memory alongside the faint glint of pride in the man's tired eyes. He'd done what felt right, what his father would have done, but the cost had been steep. His job, his stability, his place in a town that barely seemed to see him. Marcus pulled his jacket tighter, the thin fabric doing little to shield him from the biting wind. He had no destination in mind, only the need to keep moving, to outrun the sting of Carl Harper's words. "You're fired. Pack your stuff and get out." The dismissal echoed in his ears, louder than the rain. But what hurt more was the silence of the customers inside the store, their averted gazes a silent agreement with Carl's cruelty. Marcus had always been the quiet one, the man who watched and listened, who noticed the small injustices others ignored, the shop clerk who worked through a fever, the kid who stole a candy bar because he hadn't eaten in days. But tonight, he'd been the one to step forward, and Maplewood had turned its back on him. His rented room above the barber shop was a few blocks away, a cramped space with a sagging bed, a single chair, and a shelf of military history books that had once belonged to his father. It wasn't much, but it was home, or it had been until now. With no job, he knew the rent would be impossible to meet, and the landlord, Mr. Grayson, wasn't known for patience. Marcus's savings were meager, barely enough for a week's groceries, and the thought of losing his room, of being truly adrift in a town that had never felt like his, sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the rain. As he turned down a narrow alley, seeking a shortcut to avoid the worst of the storm, he heard a faint rustling behind a dumpster. He paused, his instincts as a security guard kicking in, and peered into the shadows. There, crouched against the brick wall, was Daniel Reed, the old man from earlier. His tattered coat was soaked, his gray beard dripping with rainwater, and his hands trembled as he clutched the same paper bag to his chest, shielding it from the storm. The makeshift bandage on his leg had come loose, revealing a jagged scar that spoke of battles long past. Marcus's heart clenched at the sight. This man, a veteran who'd likely seen horrors Marcus could only imagine, was shivering in an alley, forgotten by the world. "Sir," Marcus called softly, stepping closer, his voice barely audible over the rain. Daniel looked up, his blue eyes wide with surprise, then softened with recognition. You're the one who saluted me," he said, his voice hoarse, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Marcus nodded, kneeling beside him, heedless of the rain soaking his knees. "You shouldn't be out here in this weather," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "Let me help you find a place to stay tonight." Daniel shook his head, his hands tightening around the bag. "Ain't nowhere for me to go," he murmured, his voice breaking. "Shelters are full, and I don't take handouts." Marcus's jaw tightened, a surge of frustration rising in his chest. Not at Daniel, but at a town that could let a man like this slip through the cracks. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the last few dollars he had, and pressed them into Daniel's hand. "It's not much," he said, "but it'll get you a hot meal at the diner down the street. They're open late." Daniel's eyes glistened, his scarred hand closing around the crumpled bills. "You've already done enough, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That salute, it reminded me of who I used to be." He reached into his coat, pulling out a small, tarnished object, a military dog tag, its chain frayed but intact. "Take this," he said, pressing it into Marcus's palm. "Name's Daniel Reed, serial number 5281. If I don't make it through this storm, I want someone to know I was here." Marcus's throat tightened as he took the dog tag, the metal cold against his skin. "You'll make it, sir," he said, his voice steady despite the ache in his chest. "I'll make sure of it." But Daniel only smiled, a faint, weary smile, and turned back to the wall, pulling his coat tighter around him. Marcus stood, his hands clenched at his sides, the rain dripping from his brow. He wanted to do more, to find a way to help, but the storm and his own uncertainty held him back. With a final nod, he turned and walked away, the dog tag heavy in his pocket, a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. Back in his room, Marcus sat on the edge of his bed, the rain drumming against the cracked window. His cat, a gray tabby named Scout, curled up beside him, purring softly as Marcus ran a hand over its fur. The dog tag lay on the bedside table, its faded inscription catching the dim light from a street lamp outside. Marcus traced the letters with his thumb, whispering the name to himself, Daniel Reed. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, how he'd pay rent, where he'd find work, how he'd survive, but he knew one thing. He'd done what was right. And as he drifted into an uneasy sleep, he had no idea that the dawn would bring a reckoning that would shake Maplewood to its core. Chapter 3. A Dawn of Reckoning. The first light of dawn crept over Maplewood, Tennessee, on May 26, 2025, painting the rain-soaked streets in shades of pale gold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a town scrubbed clean, the air heavy with the scent of wet pavement and pine. At Harper's Hardware, the neon sign flickered weakly, a stark contrast to the flurry of activity unfolding outside. The narrow street, usually quiet at this hour, was lined with a convoy of military vehicles. Black Humvees and transport vans, their engines idling with a low, steady hum. Soldiers in full-dress uniforms stood in formation, their boots polished to a mirror shine, their faces set in expressions of unwavering resolve. There were dozens of them, stretching down the block, a silent army that had descended on Maplewood without warning. Marcus Evans stood on the sidewalk across the street, his breath catching in his throat as he took in the scene. He'd been woken by the sound of engines rumbling outside his rented room above the barbershop, a sound that had pulled him from a restless sleep filled with dreams of rain and a veteran's trembling hands. Now, as he stood in his worn jacket and jeans, the dog tag of Daniel Reed heavy in his pocket, he felt a mix of awe and unease. The soldiers, Army, Marines, some in Air Force blues, stood in perfect rows, their presence a stark contrast to the sleepy town around them. Shopkeepers peered through their windows, Pedestrians stopped in their tracks, and a small crowd began to gather, their whispers buzzing like static in the morning air. Inside Harper's Hardware, Carl Harper was behind the counter, his hands fumbling with a stack of receipts as he tried to ignore the growing commotion outside. He'd opened the store early, hoping to shake off the unease of the previous night's events. Firing Marcus had felt like a victory in the moment, a way to assert his control, but now it gnawed at him, a nagging sense of something unfinished. The bell above the door jingled, sharp and sudden, and Carl looked up, his heart sinking as a tall figure in an army dress uniform stepped inside. The officer was broad-shouldered, his chest adorned with medals, his face carved with the kind of authority that made the room feel smaller. Behind him, 2 more soldiers followed, their expressions unreadable. "I'd like to speak to the owner," the officer said, his voice calm but commanding, cutting through the silence like a blade. Carl stepped forward, his throat dry, his usual bravado faltering under the weight of the man's gaze. I'm the owner," he stammered, his hands clenching at his sides. "What's this about?" The officer removed his cap, revealing a head of close-cropped gray hair, and fixed Carl with a stare that seemed to see straight through him. "My name is Colonel James Reed," he said, his voice steady. "I'm the son of Daniel Reed, the man you called trash last night." The words hit Carl like a physical blow, his face paling as the name registered. The crowd outside grew louder, their murmurs turning to gasps as they pressed closer to the windows, phones raised to capture the moment. Colonel Reed's voice rose, carrying the weight of years of pain and pride. "In 1991, during the Gulf War, my father led a unit through a minefield to rescue 15 wounded soldiers," he said, his tone unyielding. "He took shrapnel to his leg, saving my squad leader's life. He was awarded the Silver Star for his valor, but this town, this store, saw fit to shame him." Carl's mouth opened, but no words came. He glanced around, searching for support, but the few employees behind the counter looked away, their faces pale. Colonel Reed stepped closer, his presence towering. "The security guard you fired, Marcus Evans, showed my father the respect this country failed to give him," he continued, his voice cracking with emotion. "He saluted a man who'd been forgotten, a man who deserved better, and now, we're here to honor that act of kindness." At his signal, a young sergeant stepped forward, holding a small black case. Inside was a Silver Star medal, its ribbon pristine, its surface gleaming in the morning light. Colonel Reed turned to the door, his voice ringing out over the crowd. "Bring Marcus Evans here," he commanded, and the soldiers outside snapped to attention, their movements precise as they parted to form a path down the street. The crowd buzzed with anticipation, whispers spreading like wildfire. Someone had seen Marcus walking toward the town square, and a runner was sent to fetch him. Minutes later, Marcus appeared at the edge of the crowd, his worn jacket still damp from the previous night's rain, his eyes wide with disbelief as he took in the sight before him. The soldiers stood in formation, their uniforms a sea of green and blue, their hands raised in a crisp salute as he approached. Marcus froze, his heart pounding, the dog tag in his pocket feeling heavier than ever. Colonel Reed stepped forward, his eyes softening as he met Marcus's gaze. "My father told me what you did," he said, his voice thick with gratitude. "You saw him when no one else did. This medal, it's his Silver Star. He wants you to have it." Marcus shook his head, his voice trembling. "I can't take this, sir," he said, his hand instinctively reaching for the dog tag in his pocket. "It's his honor, not mine." Colonel Reed placed the case in Marcus's hands, his grip firm but gentle. "It's yours now," he said, his voice unwavering. "You honored a hero, and now we honor you." The soldiers saluted again, their hands rising in unison, a silent tribute that echoed through the quiet town. Marcus stood frozen, tears stinging his eyes, as the weight of their respect settled over him like a mantle he'd never expected to wear. The morning sun climbed higher over Maplewood, Tennessee, on May 26, 2025, casting long shadows across the street where the soldiers' convoy had transformed the quiet town into a scene of reverence. The crowd outside Harper's Hardware had grown, their murmurs a steady hum as they watched the soldiers in their crisp uniforms, their salutes a silent testament to the moment unfolding. Marcus Evans stood at the center of it all, the small black case containing Daniel Reed's silver star heavy in his hands, its weight a reminder of the honor he'd never sought but now bore. The dog tag in his pocket seemed to burn against his chest, Daniel's name, etched into the tarnished metal, a quiet promise that had led to this extraordinary dawn. Colonel James Reed stood before Marcus, his gray eyes steady with a mix of gratitude and resolve. The officer's voice carried over the crowd, firm but warm, as he addressed the man who'd saluted his father in the rain. "My father hasn't spoken much in years," he said, his tone softening with emotion. PTSD took a lot from him after the war, his home, his health, his place in the world. But last night, when I found him at the edge of town, he told me about you. He said you gave him something he hadn't felt in decades. Respect. The crowd fell silent, their phones lowered for a moment as the weight of his words settled over them. Marcus's throat tightened, his eyes dropping to the silver star in the case. I didn't do anything special, sir," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, his hands trembling as he held the medal. I saw a veteran. I knew he deserved better." Colonel Reed shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You saw a man," he corrected, his voice firm. "Not a beggar, not trash, a man. And that's more than most have done for him in years." He turned to the soldiers behind him, raising a hand, and as one, they lowered their salutes, their movements precise and reverent. Inside the store, Carl Harper stood frozen behind the counter, his face pale as the reality of the moment crashed over him. The soldiers' presence, the crowd's whispers, the weight of Colonel Reed's words. It was all too much. He'd fired Marcus without a second thought, his temper flaring at the idea of a security guard wasting time on a beggar. But now, as the truth of Daniel Reed's identity and Marcus's kindness came to light, Carl felt the ground shift beneath him. The customers who'd gathered inside the store, locals who'd once laughed at his outbursts, now stared at him with a mix of disgust and pity, their silence a heavier judgment than any words could be. Colonel Reed turned to Carl, his gaze hardening as he addressed the man who'd dismissed Marcus without a thought. "You called my father trash," he said, his voice low and dangerous, each word a blade. "You fired a man for showing respect to a hero who risked his life for this country. What does that say about you?" Carl opened his mouth to protest, his hands raised in a futile defense, but the words died in his throat as the crowd outside began to murmur again, their voices rising in a chorus of disapproval. "Shame on you!" someone shouted from the back, and others joined in, their anger a wave that Carl couldn't hope to stem. Marcus stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a lifeline. "Sir," he said, addressing Colonel Reed, his tone steady despite the chaos around him. "I don't want trouble for Mr. Harper. I just wanted to do right by your father." The sincerity in his words silenced the crowd for a moment, their anger giving way to a quiet respect. Colonel Reed nodded, his expression softening as he looked at Marcus. "You've done more than that," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've given my father back a piece of his dignity. And now we're here to make sure you're not forgotten either." At his signal, a young soldier stepped forward, holding a folded American flag, its stars and stripes pristine against the morning light. "This flag was flown at our base in honor of my father's service," Colonel Reed said, placing it in Marcus's hands alongside the silver star. "It's yours now, a symbol of the respect you showed, and the honor you've earned." Marcus's hands shook as he took the flag, his eyes glistening with tears he couldn't hold back. The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers a wave of support that rolled through the street, drowning out the last echoes of Carl's shame. Outside, the soldiers began to disperse, their mission complete, but their presence had left an indelible mark on Maplewood. News crews had arrived, their cameras capturing the scene as reporters whispered into microphones. The hashtag Maplewood Hero already trending on social media. Marcus stood amidst the crowd, the flag and medal in his hands, feeling the weight of their meaning settle over him. He'd lost his job, his stability, but in that moment, he'd gained something far greater. A reminder that kindness, even in the smallest act, could spark a fire that no storm could extinguish. The late morning sun hung high over Maplewood, Tennessee, on May 26, 2025, its golden light casting a warm glow over the town that had been forever changed by the events outside Harper's Hardware. The crowd that had gathered to witness the soldiers' tribute to Marcus Evans began to disperse, their voices a low hum of awe and inspiration as they shared videos and photos on social media. The hashtag Maplewood Hero spreading like wildfire. The soldiers' convoy had pulled away, their mission to honor Marcus complete, but the echoes of their salutes lingered in the air, a reminder of the power of kindness and the weight of respect. Marcus stood on the sidewalk, the folded American flag and silver star case still in his hands, their significance a heavy but humbling burden he carried with quiet pride. Inside the store, Carl Harper slumped against the counter, his face ashen as the reality of his actions settled over him like a shroud. The once bustling Harper's Hardware was eerily silent, the few remaining customers slipping out the door, their glances a mix of disdain and pity. The news of Daniel Reed's heroism, and Carl's callous dismissal of both the veteran and Marcus, had spread through Maplewood like a storm, and the town's judgment was swift. By noon, social media was flooded with posts condemning Carl, with hashtags like #JusticeForDaniel and #BoycottHarpers trending alongside #MaplewoodHero. Local businesses began to distance themselves, suppliers canceled orders, and whispers of a boycott grew louder with each passing hour. Marcus, however, felt no satisfaction in Carl's downfall. He stood outside, the flag and medal a tangible reminder of the moment that had changed his life, but his thoughts were on Daniel Reed, the man whose quiet dignity had sparked this reckoning. He slipped the dog tag from his pocket, tracing the faded inscription with his thumb. Daniel Reed, serial number 5281. He needed to find him, to ensure the man who'd inspired this moment knew he wasn't forgotten. With a determined nod, Marcus tucked the flag and medal case under his arm and set off down Main Street, the crowd parting around him with nods of respect as he passed. He found Daniel in the same alley where they'd met the night before, sitting on a crate with his tattered coat pulled tight around him. The rain had stopped, but the old man's hands still trembled, his paper bag resting on his lap like a lifeline. His gray beard was damp with morning dew, his blue eyes distant as he stared at the ground, lost in memories Marcus couldn't begin to fathom. "Mr. Reed," Marcus called softly, kneeling beside him, his voice gentle but firm. Daniel looked up, his expression shifting from surprise to recognition, a faint smile breaking through the weariness on his face. You came back," he murmured, his voice hoarse but warm. Marcus nodded, holding out the silver star case. "Your son was here this morning," he said, his voice steady. "Colonel Reed, he told us who you are, what you did. They came to honor you, and me, for what I did last night." Daniel's eyes widened, his trembling hand reaching for the case, his fingers brushing the metal with a reverence that spoke of decades of sacrifice. "My boy, he found me," he whispered, tears glistening in his eyes. I thought I'd lost him for good." Marcus placed the flag in Daniel's lap, his voice thick with emotion. "This flag was flown for you, sir. You're not forgotten. Not anymore." Daniel clutched the flag to his chest, his shoulders shaking as tears fell freely down his weathered face. "I never wanted anyone to see me like this," he said, his voice breaking. "But you saw me. You saluted me." Marcus's own eyes stung with tears, his hand resting on Daniel's shoulder. "You deserved that salute, sir," he said, his voice firm. "And you deserve more than this alley. Come with me. I'll make sure you're taken care of." With Daniel's hesitant agreement, Marcus helped him to his feet, supporting the old man as they walked toward the town square, where a local news crew had set up to cover the aftermath of the soldiers' visit. The reporter, a young woman named Sarah Klein, spotted Marcus and rushed over, her camera crew in tow. "Mr. Evans," she called, her voice breathless with excitement. You're the man who saluted Daniel Reed, the war hero. Can you tell us what happened? Marcus paused, glancing at Daniel, who gave a small nod of encouragement. I saw a veteran in need of respect, Marcus said, his voice steady. And I gave it to him, that's all. The interview aired across the region within hours, the story of Marcus and Daniel spreading far beyond Maplewood. Veterans organizations reached out, offering Daniel a place in a nearby VA housing unit with full medical care, and Colonel Reed ensured his father would never be alone again. For Marcus, the outpouring of support was overwhelming. Local businesses offered him jobs. A veterans nonprofit set up a fund in his name to help struggling families, and the town rallied around him, their shame at Carl's actions turning to a fierce determination to do better. The golden hues of late summer bathed Maplewood, Tennessee, on August 15, 2025, 3 months after the unforgettable morning that had transformed the town. The streets, once quiet and unassuming, now buzzed with a renewed sense of community, their storefronts adorned with American flags and posters for the newly established Maplewood Veterans Fund, a testament to the legacy sparked by Marcus Evans and Daniel Reed. The events of May 26 had left an indelible mark, and Maplewood was no longer just a sleepy town. It had become a beacon of hope, a place where kindness and respect were no longer taken for granted. Marcus stood at the center of the town square, where a small crowd had gathered for the opening of the Maplewood Community Center, a renovated warehouse turned into a hub for veterans and struggling families, funded by donations that had poured in after Marcus's story went viral. He wore a simple button-up shirt, the Silver Star medal pinned to his chest at Daniel's insistence, its weight a constant reminder of the honor he'd been given. Beside him stood Daniel Reed, no longer the shivering figure in a tattered coat but a man restored, his gray beard neatly trimmed, his eyes bright with pride. He wore a new suit, a gift from his son, Colonel James Reed, who stood on his other side, his uniform gleaming in the sunlight as he surveyed the crowd with a quiet smile. The center's doors opened to reveal a space filled with warmth, tables laden with food, walls decorated with photos of veterans, and a small stage where local children had prepared a song to honor the day. Marcus had been instrumental in its creation, working alongside Daniel and Colonel Reed to ensure it would be a place of healing and support. The Maplewood Veterans Fund, named in Daniel's honor, had raised thousands to provide housing, medical care, and job training for veterans and families in need, and Marcus had taken a role as its coordinator, his steady presence a bridge between the town and those it had once overlooked. Harper's Hardware, where the story had begun, sat empty at the edge of town, its windows dark, a for sale sign flapping in the breeze. Carl Harper had left Maplewood weeks after the soldiers' visit, his reputation in tatters as the boycott and public outcry forced him to close the store. But Marcus felt no bitterness toward him. Instead, he channeled his energy into building something better, something that would ensure no one like Daniel would ever be forgotten again. The community center was a testament to that vision, its walls echoing with laughter and conversation as families and veterans mingled, their stories weaving a tapestry of resilience and hope. Daniel stepped onto the stage, his cane tapping lightly against the wood, and the crowd fell silent, their eyes fixed on the man who'd once been invisible to them. I never thought I'd see a day like this, he said, his voice steady, his blue eyes glistening with emotion. I was lost, broken, but this man, he gestured to Marcus, his hand trembling slightly. He saw me, he saluted me, and now, because of him, I have my son back. I have a home. I have a reason to keep going. The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers a wave of gratitude that rolled through the square, and Marcus bowed his head, his throat tight with emotion. Colonel Reed took the microphone next, his voice ringing out with pride. My father is a hero, he said, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. But so is Marcus Evans. His kindness reminded us what honor looks like, what it means to stand tall, even when the world turns its back. This center, this fund, it's their legacy, a reminder that no one should ever be invisible. He turned to Marcus, placing a hand on his shoulder. Thank you, Marcus, for seeing my father, for seeing us all. The crowd cheered again, their voices a chorus of support, and Marcus felt the weight of their gratitude settle over him like a warm embrace. As the ceremony ended, Marcus stepped off the stage, his eyes catching Daniel's across the room. The old man raised a hand in a salute, and Marcus returned it, a silent promise between them. A promise of respect, of remembrance, of a future where no hero would be forgotten. The Maplewood Community Center opened its doors wide, welcoming all who needed it, and Marcus knew that this was just the beginning. His small act of kindness had ignited a movement, proving that honor, as his father had always said, was a quiet force, one that could change the world, one salute at a time. Thank you for joining Endless Stories on this journey of honor, kindness, and justice with Marcus and Daniel. If their story moved you, if you believe in the power of respect, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to catch every tale we share. Drop "Honor Prevails" in the comments below. Share this video with those who still believe in quiet courage, and join us in spreading this legacy of hope. Until our next story, keep standing tall,